morning, grinders. Welcome to the DFS pregame show here on RotoGrinders. I'm Jordan Cooper, aka blenderhd, blenderhd. You can find me on Twitter right there. And this is the show where we normally would go over yesterday's slate. Then we talk a little bit about today's slate in the NBA, but there's nothing going on. It should have been a day off. But no, I go every day. I see people in the YouTube chat hit the thumbs up button. Give me those thumbs for the apple juice. Dustin Hogue, Kevin Copeland, Alan Alexander, Card Fan, Gerald Miller, Jacob Calloway, Jesse, Matt Mears, Meat Plow, Ben Cares, Dave Wagner, Lodal. Welcome, as always, on Mondays. It's Mondays with McCool, with my fellow co-author of the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports, How to Think Like a Professional DFS Player. It's a 15-hour audio masterclass you can pick up at theoryofdfs.com. It's my author, James McCool. James, you took off this weekend. This weekend was life without DFS sometimes is actually pretty good, especially when it's NBA. It feels like the past couple of days, outside of obviously if you played the All-Star game yesterday, showdown, you had the Embiid and Simmons get ruled out. We couldn't even avoid late news in an All-Star game. But doesn't it make it feel like, isn't life less stressful? It moves so much slower and so much calmer when there's no NBA DFS.
Yeah, man. I mean, I did want to play this weekend, and we were talking about it before the show, and I thought about jumping into a little bit of NHL. I thought about jumping into a little bit of MMA. I still have like League of Legends, Counter-Strike, which I'll play, but I wanted to try to jump into something new because without NBA, I did kind of feel like a little like what do I do with my hands? Like it's 4:30 p.m. and I'm not sweating over running models and like trying to figure out what the hell to do with all these late scratches. So I was thinking about playing those, but it was nice to have kind of like a day off, and like a couple days off because I didn't play much Saturday or Sunday. All I did was just like run the models and hang out with the kid. And it is kind of like, it's important, I think. And I tell this to people all the time that taking breaks, you got to like refresh your mental a little bit. The daily grind is hard. And I think that the daily grind has actually gotten harder over this last year because of the way that sports have been laid out and with how many more daily sports we have now. Like if you're like me and are interested in the esports side of things and like League of Legends DFS and Counter-Strike DFS, and we just had Call of Duty come back these last couple of weeks, those daily sports, they do end up taking a toll on you a little bit. So that's why the All-Star break is so important for content creators. Is you can take a couple days to just be like, nope, not doing it. Just gonna like relax. I'm gonna sit on the couch, gonna watch YouTube videos for no reason because I don't have to deal with late scratches. So it is like NBA with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons getting ruled out. That is just like quintessential of this NBA season of like, we can't even make it through the freaking All-Star game without having somebody get scratched due to COVID and having like a couple players be grossly underpriced because of it. Come on. It's wild. So it was nice to take a little bit of a break. We're back this week and we'll be closing out the NBA season through the next couple months. When baseball season starts, like I will care so little about NBA. It's not even funny. But yeah, it was a nice little break over the last couple of days for sure.
Right. And I played MMA for the first time in 8 months on Saturday because I saw it was a pay-per-view card, 3 title fights. So you have 3 5-round fights, 15 fights, and none of them being canceled. I mean, one of the main reasons that I didn't want to play MMA anymore while I was playing another sport is because fights were getting canceled. So now it's like, now I have to monitor those lineups. I mean, the best part of like PGA and MMA is one, you don't need to know as much. There's not the correlation doesn't matter. Like, I mean, you're essentially like in MMA, as for the most part, there are certain cases where it could work out, but for the most part, you're not rostering 2 fighters from the same fight. So like outside of that, none of the fights correlate to one another. So you're just basically, if you're playing a large field, just build lineups that are going to be as unique as possible. And you how much do you need to know? Now, obviously, okay, what you look into the betting lines. and you go, what fights are more likely to end inside the distance? Like the styles, like grappler, striker. So you could gain what the upside of certain underdogs are, certain fights are. So, but outside of that, you could make lineups. So on a 15 fight card, I'm like I was playing these 10 fight cards where finding unique lineups, very difficult, where the plus whatever million underdog for the, like Megan Anderson against Nunes this past Saturday, on a 10 fight card, they'd be 12% owned, because how else are you supposed to get different? And how are you supposed to jam in top end players? You go, okay, I hope she scores well or does something. But on these types of cards, you find multiple fighters that are single digit owned, and especially in the mid range. So I centered my strategy around 3 single digit owned fighters. Now one did well and 2 didn't. So it didn't work out overall, but I just thought it was so much more intriguing. But at 5:15 Eastern, everything locks. That's it. I could just sit back and turn on ESPN Plus and just I guess I'm going to watch people beat the crap at each other for the next 7 to 8 hours, and just whatever it is. But yeah, I have to admit that MMA DFS is probably the only DFS. If you play GPPs, now if you play cash, it's a different story. But if you play GPPs and MMA, I think it's the only DFS sport. Correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe in esports it's maybe similar or something. I don't know. Name any other sport where if you're a GPP player, you could literally be drawing dead in a minute into the slate. Know that you cannot possibly win a GPP 60 seconds into a slate.
I'm trying to think if there's any sport that happens.
Because in MMA, you have the first fight, it ends in the inside the distance, first stoppage in the first minute.
Yeah.
A knockdown, a take. Next thing you know, the underdog of the first fight has 121 points.
Yeah.
And it's just well, I didn't have any of that. He's 12% owned, so it's he's owned enough, and you're I guess I ain't winning 200,000 a day. Immediately, literally, 60 seconds in, I'm not drawing to first place ever at all for the next 7 hours.
In a best of one slate on League of Legends, and especially in something like CBLOL, which is the Brazilian league that they run once every 2 weeks, something like that. There are going to be times where it's something called an invade, where at the beginning of the game, both teams start on either side of the map. And then usually what they do is they defend their own sides. They stand and they defend their own sides. But sometimes what'll happen is one team will just clump together, all 5 players, and they will just go spearhead right into the other team. And the only time that I can think of where you would actually be dead in GPPs is if you had exposure to the team that lost that fight on the first game of the entire thing. And if you had exposure to that one, you're dead if that team lost that fight, because they will not come back from a 5 kill deficit, period, point blank at all. That's just not the way that it works. But yeah, with MMA, you're right that within the first minute, you can literally have somebody just runs up, does a flying knee and knocks out the favorite, and it's 10% owned, and you don't have them, you're screwed, right? I mean,
so someone in chat is mentioning NASCAR. That could happen, right?
Oh yeah,
crash in the first lap, right?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, that can happen.
And right. And I have that guy. And no, but see, those are the instances where you would need to have heavy exposure to a guy that does. We're still talking about. Obviously, you could be dead 60 seconds into a slate. Did you have Paul George? You have 100% of your roster.
Oh yeah.
Right. Right. Of course. Yes. You could be dead like that. But that's because you're overexposed to an injury. I'm talking about you don't have a guy scores so many points, something that you could roster scores so many points in literally the first, because in NASCAR, how do you can't score, you can't win the race, right? You can't have a driver that's if you don't have this driver, you're dead 60 seconds in. Because even a leadoff home run in baseball, Okay, well, I can find a home run elsewhere. That's not like I'm not going to be dead. But you could have 120 plus points, the 130 plus point fighter now because they have the bonus now. You get 25 extra points for inside of a minute. So imagine a couple of strikes, a knockdown, and a KO. I mean, so like that would be 90 plus 25 is 125 plus the 10-point knockdown. Yeah, you get like 130 points in that scenario. And it's like 130 points, you're most likely going to be in the optimal in MMA on any GPP. And then you're just sitting there going, I played 20 lineups. I don't have any of this guy. Like, close. I mean, yeah, you could cash, obviously, but you ain't going to win.
Yeah.
I just don't think that there is anything like that. I mean, yes, the injuries I have too much of a guy that's getting 0. I'm talking about I have none of a guy that has a billion points 60 seconds into a slate.
Yeah. And that's, one of the reasons why people like the sweat of MMA is that every single fight is so consequential, and they're condensed environments, like they're independent things that happen. So I mean, I understand the appeal of why people like MMA, and for people like Brian Jester, right, over at Occupy Fantasy, that dude loves MMA DFS because his entire thing is build unique lineups. That's it.
That's why I like it. That's why NFL Showdown. I don't like the slates like NFL Showdown when we have very condensed offenses where the player pool is not big enough. I like the cult. When the Colts are on NFL Showdown where it's they throw to 6 different guys.
Yeah.
And the Buccaneers, it's okay, there are a multitude of ways to go that are projected well and still reasonable. And then MMA, the same thing. That's why when there's 9 fights, it's it's almost worthless to play. In large field GPPs, but 15, give me 15 and I could find some discrepancies. And there were plenty of arbitrage situations. I mean, Amanda Nunes was 63% owned, and technically you didn't need her. I mean, she scored 98 points, which is great. I mean, she won in a minute and a half, but that's the problem when she's 9,600. You don't. There were multiple. I think 9 or 10 fighters that scored over 100 points.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need a 90 point. The highest the price person, scoring less than 100. You don't need them. But she was still in the winning lineup. So there were tons of unique lineups that were not rostered or just didn't get there. I had the ones that didn't get there. I had the ones where it's this is the unique lineup, but I got 7 points from Jordan Espinoza. It's okay, well he got killed, right? He got smothered on the mat for 3 rounds, so he couldn't even score any points anyway. But I mean, I'm getting the guy at 7% ownership, so but I'm just saying that I prefer MMA because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm gonna say a controversial statement, possibly.
Oh,
possibly.
Okay,
maybe not. With MLB coming up, because obviously we're talking about sports that maybe people don't play as much. Out of the major DFS sports, I think MLB is the one where you could be successful without knowing much about the sport. Compared to NBA, compared to NFL.
Yeah.
I'm obviously PGA and MMA. I mean, the correlation is limited, if any.
Yeah.
I mean, those sports, you could feel free to close. In golf, you could close your eyes and just spend $50K of your salary and throw it against six golfers.
Yep.
You're never going to be that far behind or anything, and probably the same in MMA. But those are solo sport. I mean, that's any sport like that with individual tennis. There's no correlation. There's really. You're limiting the amount of variables you even have to consider from a gameplay perspective. But in the team sports, I think MLB, because most people look at MLB and go, wow, there's a lot of stats. Because baseball is the most stat-intensive, sabermetrics. I mean, you have tons of stuff there. But from a DFS perspective of playing the game of DFS, I think MLB requires the least amount of knowledge on the actual sport.
Yeah, well, no, I think I can agree with that. The only argument against that statement would be that everybody has at least some sort of aggregated projection system.
No. See, you're not even getting my controversial thing. I think you could win at baseball without projections.
No. I hear you. Like I hear you. That would be. I think that I would agree with that, because like the only thing that you have to understand about MLB is that stacking is God. Is that stacking is like that as long as you stack together teams and like fill out pitchers that hopefully don't suck, you can probably find some success. I think I'd agree with that.
Right, because I think in NBA, people would say NBA is the most predictive because it's the lowest variance. But the thing is that even in projections, you need to allocate minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You need, and which means you need to know the teams. You need, that's the human element of NBA projections.
Mm-hmm.
Of this guy's out, this guy, how are they going to run this rotation? Well, you need to know enough about basketball to know. You don't look at Porzingis is out. Boban 36 minutes. Like you can't just do that because yes, he'll be in every lineup if that's the case, but he's not going to play 36 minutes. In NFL, you have to allocate rushing share, target share, right? And
NFL, I think you actually have to know the most.
Right. I think, truthfully, yes. I think correct. You would have to know the most. Now, in the grand scheme of what we're talking about, like still have to play DFS as a game well. I think that's 90% of it. But I think in baseball, if I didn't use any projections, if I didn't make a model, if I didn't use Cardi's bat projections, if I didn't use just nothing, all I need to know to be competitive in DFS for GPPs at least is if you just in your mind said 5-3 on DraftKings, if you said you need to stack 5-3 on DraftKings and play two pitchers that aren't playing the teams that you're stacking, you're going to be competitive. Because you just simply put whatever team you want to do, 5-3. 5-3 means a 5-man stack of one team and a 3-man stack of another team. Now, obviously, you could do 5-1-1-1, but that makes it more complicated. I'm talking about for someone that, like, if I said Mike Trout, they'd go who? Right? Someone that doesn't know anything about baseball. And you go, okay, what I want you to do is pick pick two teams that fit in positionally that are 5-3, and then whatever two pitchers fit. And truthfully, whatever two pitchers you want. Like, don't even like, you don't even know who these people are, right? I think in GPPs and large field GPPs, you could still be competitive by just random. And if you want to go by, I just have to look at team totals, right? I'm just gonna look at team totals and the pitcher line, right? Because a minus 250, Jacob deGrom, Garrett Cole, like you could tell, it's I'm gonna stack against these guys. No, you're probably not. But if you just looked at that, everything else, WOBA, ISO, any WAR, right? Whatever, Sierra and Babbitt, and I could just name all the advanced stats. You could just throw them out, and like if you played the whole season doing that, I think you could be profitable. You would at least be competitive. But in NBA, if you didn't know, and you just say, I'm not going to care about minutes, I'm not going to look at projections at all. Like I think you're dead in NBA because projections are so much more accurate and closer to what's going to happen. And in NFL, I think you'd be dead also because, like in NFL, it's still like, I'm going to take a quarterback and two of the wide receivers and run it back, and like still at the end of the day, you kind of have to know a little bit more. But in MLB, I really think you could close your eyes and say, Pirates 5, Rockies 3, and two pitchers, and just like. And however they fit, they fit. And if you wanted to go into an optimizer and say, I want 100 lineups that are 5-3 and just put 0 and just randomize whatever the projections, just put a randomness 100% and just let it do its thing. To me, that's the reason is because in GPPs, it's still not enough people stack that even now that I think that's doable.
There are, and it's every single year, man. It's every single year that you get about 2.5 weeks into the MLB season before somebody says, well, the winning lineup like didn't have a stack. Like, should we actually be stacking every year without fail, 2.5 weeks in? And I will make a joke about it on Twitter, 2.5 weeks in. Because people don't, everybody wants to think about DFS as like being a way of predicting the future and like saying, oh, well, technically you can capture a home run from every single player on the slate and you don't have to stack. Technically, you could do that. Absolutely. Go to any betting site that you choose, and put together a parlay of 8 home run props. Any site, and see how astronomical the odds are that you just got offered on that player prop parlay. Like, just go see what it is. It is massive. Like the chances of you predicting that many home runs accurately, especially like this is if you did not have a salary cap and you were just able to take Mike Trout, Giancarlo Stanton, Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, like if you were able to fill out a roster with dudes who actually do hit home runs at a relatively decent clip, we're talking like 35 plus home run per year type guys, even then the chances of you putting together a player prop that is all home runs is still going to be just this massive payoff because the odds are just so huge. So stacking in MLB is really the only thing you have to care about. And you mentioned vomit stacks all the time when you're going through MLB. And that's one of the things, like people just refuse to stack together teams that they perceive as having low upside. But I mean, everybody else is thinking that too. If you have 2 pitchers that are both 40+% owned, you have Jacob deGrom and Garrett Cole on the same slate, and everybody is like taking the back of the order of like the Red Sox, something like that, and you're able to get the top of the order of 2 teams that everybody thinks sucks. In GPPs, you're likely more live than the people who are taking the terrible players rather than the players from the top of the order from the team that everybody perceives bad. So yeah, the MLB with NHL or with NFL, I think that the knowledge of understanding who is actually going to be on the field with the quarterback is one of the things that you kind of need to know. The knowledge of understanding injuries, the knowledge of understanding what running backs actually are going to be on the goal line, like all those things, you have to have that knowledge. You don't have to have any of that knowledge in MLB. I like modeling for MLB because it is so stats based, and I feel like I can do a very good job of extracting upside and potential upside from players because of the stats that I use. But if you didn't have any stats at all, you could literally just stack the Marlins all year. You could just stack the Orioles all year. And like eventually over 100 games, you're probably going to hit once. Like you'll probably get one game where they put up 12 runs. The Pirates can put up 12 runs. Like Colin Moran, that dude hits balls hard. So like you could do that over the course of a year. And that's something that I've always been interested in. And I think that it was Anthony Amico last year talked about just like taking a team and being like, I am stacking this team all year long. It does not matter the state, it does not matter the slate. Every single slate, I'm going to have a stack of this team. And over the course of 100 games, like if you have a sample that large, eventually, like you might hit the nuts with them, and the chances are probably pretty good. It's kind of like flipping coins. Like if you're not trying to guess when the coin is going to come up heads, you're going to do a better job in the long term rather than trying to predict when it's going to happen. So I think that's kind of like a cool little like theory thing of saying, well, you're just going to 5-3 all year. You're going to 5-3 these teams that everybody thinks sucks. And you're hoping that you're just going to hit the nuts once when they're 1% owned because they'll be 1% owned all year.
Right. But you don't even have to think of it that way. I mean, like I clarified in the chat about, I'm not saying that you can be profitable in MLB DFS GPPs without using any projections. I'm talking about being competitive. I think that's the better way. Like, yes, I use projections in MLB to do the same thing I do in any other sport. Projection versus leverage versus correlation. It's the same exact thing. But if projections didn't exist in any sport, let's say no one could use projections, or you're coming in going, I'm purposefully choosing not to use any form of projections. Which sport would you be the most competitive in large field GPPs? to me, it's baseball. Would you do that instead of using projections? Of course not. Of course I'm going to look at this. But from a game theory perspective, I think in MLB it's more the game of DFS is so much more important than the projections because of how high variances it is and how most batters get about the same amount of opportunities. And because there was a question earlier in the chat from Jacob Calloway, because like he asked, like, are you more likely to avoid a one-off from a popular stack to the same degree that you're likely to avoid one-offs from popular NFL stacks, or is there nuance in MLB that alters the frequency? No, I agree with that. I mean, a lot of the time, like, I don't want to play the one-off of the popular. If the Dodgers are going to be popular. Like having a 28% owned on a 12-game slate, having a 28% owned Cody Bellinger,
asinine,
right? To me, is stupid in an outfield spot, especially. And you go, well, if he gets there, I mean, the Dodgers get the stack wins. Like, if anything, if I'm going to play Bellinger, I'm going to play him in a stack with the ninth hitter or something, and go like, okay, I'm going to do it that way. The only time where those types of one-offs I use is when, like, they're by far, like, the only time I can't use them is if I leave like 2,000 on the table. Like, there's some cheap stacks where, well, like, I'm going to fit in some $6,000 hitter and there's only one of them. And it's like, do I play that guy? Or do I play the guy at 5,300? I mean, and truthfully, it doesn't really matter, but projection wise, you're going to be giving up a point in projection if you don't just play the popular guy. But this comes into the same types of things we talk about in any DFS sport. I already have a 2% owned stack, right? A 5-man stack where the highest owned guy is 3.6%.
Yeah,
that's
you
the
ain't got
highest
to worry.
owned guy. So now if I have a one-off Bellinger at 28% owned, then to me, it's not that big of a deal anymore if he's the highest projected guy. But I don't seek out those situations. I mean, I don't seek out those situations at all. Typically, batters, because of the variance, I'm once guys are 20 on 10 plus game slates. Once batters start getting 20+% owned, I'm there are a lot of slates I play zero. I mean, like, I'm playing 60 to 80 lineups, and I literally have nothing. Just like if the Red Sox are chalk, if they get there, then I just lose, and then it's just the way it is. Right.
The next day.
Right. Yeah. Coors, the Cardinals are underpriced heading into the first game at Coors. So now, because that's a lot of times DraftKings does that. The first game, they don't realize that the visiting team has not been priced up enough. So you have guys at 3,800 and 4,500 heading into Coors. You're like, okay, this team's going to be mega owned. I have no problem just Xing them out. Like, because it's baseball. Like, in basketball, you'd never do that. Like, in fact, you'd be the other way. In basketball, we accidentally priced the Lakers down, and LeBron's 4,500 and AD is worth that. Like, you just play them,
yeah,
right? Like, because they're obviously going to get there like 99% of the time. But in baseball, they don't. So, like, if 25% of the lineups in the entire contest have stacks from this game, like, I just hit that X button, go X, 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 X. And you go, I hope that's a 3-2 game. If anything, sometimes I even roster the pitcher. I'll go, are you going to roster a pitcher in Coors? Why not? He's going to be none owned, right? Why? It's correlated. If that stack doesn't go off, maybe the pitcher did well. So why don't I get double? I get double leverage off of that. So and then the other strategy that you could use. These are strategies you could use without projections. Is whoever the most popular on DraftKings, the overly popular SP2 is, stack against that guy. Never the SP1. See, that people take that the wrong way, because SP1s, if you have a DeGrom, a Cole, a Verlander, those types of guys, a lot of times it's hard to stack that. Even if they do badly, it's never that badly where the stack like just goes off unless they get to the bullpen.
Right.
But typically Chris Sale is not going to get hit up to the point of stupidity. But the SP, when it's everyone's playing DeGrom at 11-6 And then Pablo Lopez at 6,800.
Julio Teheran, man.
Right,
It's
Julio
always Julio Teheran.
right. He's 7,500, and then whatever, and the wind's blowing in or something like that, and he's going to be 36% owned because he's the popular SB2. It's like that's the type of guy. Then it's like I'm going to stack against him, and it's not only the leverage against the popular stacks and the batter wise. All 36% of people that have him are getting negative points now. So like you get even more relative value from doing that. Now, should you do that every slate? Well, everything's slate dependent. But I'm talking about these are strategies that you could use that are independent of projections. That if you just went into a slate and said, I'm not going to even look at the numbers. I don't even know who the players are. Never heard of these guys. Mike Trout, who? Who's that guy? Who's Christian Yelich? I have no idea. And you just said, okay, you looked at ownership and said, oh, this 7K pitcher is going to be 40% owned for whatever reason. And you go, well, who are they facing? Well, they're facing the White Sox or something, or the Cubs. You go, okay, I'm going to take 5 guys from that. And then I have to pair these 5 guys with 3 other guys from some other team. And then I have to roster 2 pitchers. Like, wouldn't you be competitive? Like, would you be profitable at the end of the season doing this? I don't know. But I mean, you'd be playing DFS as a game. Optimally. I mean, you would have an actual plus EV strategy as a whole over the course of a 162 game season. I don't think you could duplicate that type of, like, if you had this strategy in basketball or in football. Because even in football, it's like, oh, it's the vomit stack. Oh, stack the Jets every week. Well, like that trust me, that didn't work out. Like that still doesn't work out. Right? In NBA, you can't do that because what correlation? And I'll just go in and play LeBron every slate. Like you can't play Giannis, LeBron, and just jam in like you. And then you say jam in $3,600 guys, and it's like, well, which ones? There's no like game theory strategy where I could just tell someone like this is what you do for this team sport, and just 5-3-2 pitchers and stack against the popular SB2, and just do that every slate and. I can't say that you don't have a shot at being profitable or winning a GPP, but I can't say. Can you say that in any other sport?
Not in any of the major sports. You can definitely say it for League of Legends. Like you can go into League of Legends because the way that you build for League of Legends is very, very similar to baseball, where you're building a 4-3, pretty much every single slate. And that's because the correlations are exceptionally high for League of Legends. It's a zero-sum game between 2 teams where if one team wins and puts up 18 kills, the other team died 18 times. Like it is very, if a team wins, they do well. If a team loses, they do badly. So you could basically in League of Legends in the same way, look at things and say, okay, well, top esports is going to be 60% owned on this slate. Who are they facing? I'm just going to take their opponent. And they're going to be 10% owned on the slate. And if they win, then you beat 60% of the field simply by 60% of the field having exposure to all those losses and all those deaths. So in League of Legends, yes. But in any major sport, no. Baseball, one of the things about baseball is that I think that ownership, you mentioned when a player gets above 20% owned, you're just like, I don't want any part of him. And that's because the probability of a player hitting a home run on any given slate is basically less than 25%, no matter who it is. It literally does not matter. Like Giancarlo Stanton does not have more than like a 25 to 30% chance of hitting a home run on any given slate. So if he ends up being 45% owned, like I don't want that. That's twice as owned as he probably should be. I had a question for you about ownership in terms of like assessing it for a slate. I was talking about Showdown yesterday with the All-Star game being, the All-Star game. And I was talking about Showdown specifically. And I had mentioned that you can almost look at ownership as the actual price of the player rather than their salary in DFS. Would you agree with that?
Well, for large field GPPs, yeah, because your goal is to be unique.
Yeah.
So like I care in Showdown, I care so much more about ownership product than I do about the projection at all. I mean, as long as they're going to see the court, as long as they're going to see the field. I mean, yeah, I'm probably not in NBA showdowns. I'm not rostering guys they're back of the bench. They may not even get 6 minutes in the game because how much can they score in an NBA game? But in football, I don't mind playing the players that are going to see 4 snaps. Like if they're going to be 2% owned and I need a 2% owned guy in order to make a unique lineup, then obviously the ownership matters more. But that's showdown. That's large field GPPs in showdown, where out of those 3 levers, right, we have projection, correlation, leverage. The top one is leverage, because yet when you get 20, you have to roster 6 players and you only have 20 to choose from, and the field is 70,000 entries. I mean, like, how do you expect to win first place by yourself, or at least with less amount of people by, I'm going to play the best projected player. So it's like, great, you're going to be duplicated 1,700 times. Like, that's negative EV in the long run. So,
right.
So to me, in general, ownership, to me, from a gameplay perspective, matters more than the projection to begin with.
I agree.
I know I always say, look at the projections. What does the projection say? Those types of things. But to me, the ownership is the most important thing. And in fact, you could probably infer the projections from the player projections from the ownership. So let's say on RotoGrinders Premium, which you could get $10 off your first month, click on the link in the description. If we gave you ownership projections and no player projections. So if I just told you, Garrison Matthews is 38% owned on a slate. Like, you could infer that obviously, like, at least one of Westbrook or Beeler is out, right? You could infer a lot of things and go, well, if he's 3,200 and he's going to be 38% owned, like, he has to be owned like that for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? If you can, Luka is it's a 6-game slate and Luka is 48% owned. It's like, okay, well, obviously there's going to be some cheap small forwards or power forwards, because if everyone's paying up at a guard spot, like, what's the value at power? Like, I don't need to even know projections at that point, because they would obviously be the market is efficient enough. It's not efficient, but it's at least directionally efficient enough that it would mean something. Now, but to me, ownership projections are the hardest thing to project. In fact, a lot of times, even at RotoGrinders, I don't agree with the ownership projections. I look and go, now he's going to be 10% more owned than that. Or this guy that 12% owned, he's going to be 3% owned. Like, players could get condensed so much more. Jamino uses a model that has manual input, but is mostly, algorithmically putting it together. But that human beings don't act that way. So to me, my skill is more in the leverage side, in the ownership side, and less in the projection. I mean, it's evident even in our own course. You're the projection guy, right? I say to look at the projections, but I don't build my own model. You build your own model. You have your own models. I look at other people's models, but I'm looking at other people's models because that's what other people are looking at. Like, I think in DFS, there's a very small percent of players that make their own model, that have their own model. You'll obviously see it in the higher stakes more than in the lower stakes. And then after that small percentage of people that have projections, their own projections, there's like a wide amount of players that use some type of publicly available projections. Subscribe to a site, RotoGrinders and a bunch of others. They use your model. Okay, so they're looking at that. So I'm looking at that also. Okay, so what advantage? I could see exactly the same thing that you could see. And you know what that does? That gives me insight in what other people are going to roster. Right? And then how do I take advantage of the variance of the sport in order, well, this guy shouldn't be this owned, and that guy, this construction shouldn't be as owned as it is. How do I win this GPP? Based on that 95% of my competitors are either using no model or a model that I could view. So to me, the most important thing is projecting ownership and projecting what my opponents are going to do. The small percentage of people that have their own proprietary models that may be 1 or 2 percentage points better than the publicly available ones, maybe. The ones that are publicly available are pretty good. Okay, so you're not going to get dragged. You're not going to look at a RotoGrinders projections and go, oh, I'm going to play, Garrison Matthews when he's, whatever. And then you look at some other model and he's projected for 8 points. We project him for 24, and this one project. You're not going to see those discrepancies.
Right.
So to me, the people that use their own models that are better are only going to be somewhat 1%, 2%. Sometimes it's worse. Sometimes their models are actually worse. So being the fact that I could see all of that, how important are projections in and of themselves other than the starting point? Like this is what I say. It's like projections are the starting point of the game, because either everyone has them, or if you don't, you're dead. Like, yes, I don't get projections at all. I don't get all this math stuff. So I'm just gonna go, Zion's gonna have a great game today and think I'm gonna win. Like that, yeah, those people are dead. So to me, that's the start. The starting point is the projection. But past that, people are like, well, now I'm gonna put together lineups with no actual game theory involved in it. And it's like, no, that's where I focus on. So I can look and go, that's why I say the communal the ownership sum is a guideline. I look at some of that and go, well, this guy isn't going to be this owned, and this guy, and like, yeah, the ownership sum's 214. Is that good? It's like, well, do you agree with it? Right? Is that going to change, especially in NBA? Is that going to change? Right? We have so many changes from 530 to 7 that, dude, any ownership projection you find around the industry, how it's going to be so volatile.
It is.
How many people are going to react to this news versus that news versus late news versus, so this number, RotoGrinders could project a guy for 18% ownership at one point, 30% ownership at one point, and then a half an hour before, it's like, oh, it's going to be 6% owned. And I'm like, nope, he's going to be 18% owned. You go, how do you know? Well, if everyone reacted to the news, he should be 6% owned, but not everyone's going to react to the news. So he's going to be 18% owned because there are plenty of people that still have him in his lineup at 3:00. So yes, because at 3:00, he was going to be 30% owned because he was the only value on the slate. Now we have a ton of other crap. Now he should only be 6% owned. So yes, it does show 6% owned in our projections. But I'm telling you, it's going to be more like 18% owned because I know how human beings are. And then once you take that into account, you have to adjust all the other ownerships. So next thing you know, like it's a domino effect. Now, how are you going to react to that? Like, to me, I believe I'm good at that aspect of the game. So my lineups are going to be better leveraged than your lineups if you're just going to go blindly by whatever the ownership projections are at the time.
Projecting ownership is the hardest thing in NBA. It's not even close. Like, I think that at this point I have a pretty good grasp of minutes and like minutes aggregate and stuff like that. I think that I have a really good grasp of applying boosts both manually and algorithmically through different like positional stuff and everything like that. I think that I build a pretty damn good model. The hardest part is ownership. And the reason why the hardest part is ownership is because you could be dead on 30 minutes before the slate. One guy gets ruled out. You cannot, like, you straight up cannot build an ownership like model that if somebody gets ruled out 6 minutes before the slate, you can update it that quick. You just can't, because like especially if it's like somebody who is relatively expensive, not even like super expensive, like let's say Mike Conley, right? Like 7,400, 7,500, something like that. Mike Conley gets ruled out 6 minutes before the slate. Not only does that affect the other people in his range, it also affects the people who are his backups, the people in their range. So like if you did have, 30% owned player that is 4K, right? Like Dennis Smith Jr. or some bad chalk like that or something like that is 30% owned. Well, okay, now Joe Ingles jumps right into that range as well. He's 4,200. And all of a sudden he projects for 27 fantasy points because Mike Conley's out. So Dennis Smith Jr., his ownership likely tanks quite a bit, takes off 0.5%. Joe Ingles jumps up. What do you do about Rodney Hood? Or no, not Rodney Hood. Who's
Clarkson?
Yeah, Clarkson. Yeah. What do you do about Clarkson? Okay, well, he's like 6K. So now his ownership jumps up. Now guard ownership is like going through the roof. Maybe people don't take Dennis Smith Jr. anymore because they want Luka and Clarkson instead. It is so hard. It is so hard. Especially like I try to use aggregates for my baselines for ownership. So like if one site doesn't update quick enough, Like,
Right. You don't have anything. It's worthless.
Yeah. Now I have somebody who's like 36% projected on one of like the 5 sites that I use for an aggregate baseline. And like, well, that baseline is boofed, you know?
Right.
Like,
We also have the opposite where the news changes and one site, like you'll see, like it will have it. Giannis gets ruled out, right? Giannis is out and Drew Holiday's out. And then you'll see like Middleton's 8,300 and his ownership on RG as of that moment is like 1%.
Yeah.
It's 2%. And then 5 minutes later, it's still 1%. It's like, no, it's not going to be one. Trust me, it's not going to be 1 or 2%. It takes time for these things to update. Right. So if you're looking at, depending on who's updating throughout the industry, if you see, you have to have the wherewithal to know that no, maybe Middleton projected for 7x now is not going to be 2% owned in the small forward spot.
That's why the discussion of like that's why I love my community so much over at Patered, and like that's why like you and your RotoGrinders Discord as well, like being able to say, oh no, like just expect Middleton to be like 40% owned now. And like having that, like you said, wherewithal and like the sense of understanding where that ownership is going to go to, that's huge for a lot of people. That like you can't just look at the projections. There's so much nuance that comes into it. And like that's what this whole discussion has been about. In MLB, you don't necessarily need that nuance. In NBA, you need that nuance. That's why guys like Fast Eddie Fear, like I respect the hell out of that guy because he is nuance in NBA. Like he understands NBA to that level. You understand the game of NBA to that level and understanding like
I know that if in a situation where like Giannis gets ruled out and Middleton, like now I'm looking at, okay, now we're going to have a lot more a mid-tier player at small forward. We've gotten rid of Giannis at the power forward spot. So now more people are going to pay it for Luka because he's in a guard spot, or Westbrook, or whoever. Like just how the lineup dynamics are the construction dynamics are going to change. Like I could figure that out in a minute of the news happening. But as far as like this guy, Curry's out, Green's out, who's going to start? Is it going to be Wanamaker? Is it going to be like that Warriors situation? Like to me, I just rely like Noto and Tuttle and the projections team, Andy Means. Like you deal with it. You figure out what the hell the Warriors are going to do. Put in the projections, and I'll see whether or not it's worth playing. Then you see the starting lineup come out. Wanamaker's not even in it, and I'm like, do you play Nico Mannion or do you play Wanamaker off the bench or whatever? It's like, no, I'm getting Wanamaker out of all my lineups. Like this, there's no reason. I'm making the call, right? I'm making the call saying this doesn't look. Bazemore's not in the starting lineup. Like the risk isn't where I see their ownership, and most people don't late swap. So I look at like if we knew the starting lineup for that Warriors team that other night, like before lock, Wanamaker would be 4% owned, right? Bazemore would be 4%. Like we would be talking about single-digit ownership. Mannion would be 45% owned, right? Toscano Anderson would be 50%. I mean, we know that. So now that we don't get the starting lineup until a half an hour before the game at like 9:30, and I know that 99% of people don't late swap. I'm like, well, Wanamaker's still going to be chalky, and Wanamaker and Bazemore are still going to be in lineups. Right? And look what ends up happening. They were still in lineups. I mean, but if you just if you did your calculations based on ownership at that point, it would probably reverse. It would probably lower Bazemore and Wanamaker's ownership way too much unless you manually intervene and say, no, you're right. Mathematically, they shouldn't be. Wanamaker should not be 30% owned here, mathematically. But he's going to end up being like 26 to 28% owned because only 2% of the people are going to switch. I mean, like it's just not going to happen. So that's why when I talk about projections, the player projections are the things that I outsource. So like whatever the projections are, I deal with it. Whatever the team says, that's the range of outcomes. Let me just see that. The ownership projections, which we don't get the cover here on the pregame show that often because truthfully at 11 o'clock in the morning on an NBA slate, it doesn't matter.
Ain't no ownership this early, man.
Right. You're really not going to get ownership projections, but I could take a look. I mean, that's why I just look and I go, the slate before the break. Ty Jerome is going to be 30% off. Yeah, once everyone gets ruled out, he ain't going to be the chalk anymore. But you could look at that and you could sense what it's going to be. You could run 300 lineups and go, who fits in more than others? You could aggregate projections and see what happens there. So I don't need to know an exact number at that point. But if you're building lineups where you're using ownership sum as a blunt tool, you're gonna get into a lot of trouble if you're not manually considering lineups. Where you're running your lineups at 10 minutes before lock, and the ownership projection for Chris Middleton in that Giannis example has not been updated. So Chris Middleton shows is 3% owned. So maybe you're not showing, those lineups aren't even showing up because they're too low owned for you. It's like, dude, no. Or you're putting in Chris Middleton 3% as a leverage play. Like, dude, the guy's going to be the chalkiest guy in the slate. He's not going to be 3% owned. So your ownership sum's going to show up as, oh, look, it's 140. No. It's 175. Like Chris Middleton, that 3% there is not what you think it is. So being able to adjust like that I consider that to be my strength. Reacting to what my opponents are doing, I think it's very similar. I listened to Bet the Process, which is a Rufus Peabody and Jeff Mon does a sports betting show about the process, not about picks. And they were talking about the difference between originators and steam chasers. Now, it's that originator is a model builder. Someone that is like, I'm going to take all this data and analyze it to try to predict an outcome, to try to, how many points should this team be favored by? What's the sharp line? What's the efficiency of the lines on the market? And then a steam chaser is an arbitrager, a day trader type, where I don't know anything about the teams. I don't know anything about the players, but I'm going to see where the money is moving, and I want to get to I want to arbitrage. I want to buy this at 7 points before it goes to 5.5.
CLV, homie.
CLV. Right. Closing line value, stuff like that, where you don't even need to know anything about the sport. You could just put up a Don Best screen and kind of like which way is the money moving? And then knowing the nuances of the books and where the originators are betting and stuff like that, like that's how those people make money. Now, to me, I view myself as that style of DFS player, while James, you'd be the model builder. You're the originator. I'm going to put together a model that's going to say that Giancarlo Stanton has a 26.5% chance of hitting a home run today, and then looking to see what the lines of him hitting a home run and then betting appropriately. And I'm just I could look and go, well, where's the market going, and where's the market inefficient, and where can I find those inefficiencies of the market? And I'm just looking at movement. I'm looking at charts. I'm looking at the same thing with the ownership of like, dude, I know that Wanamaker is going to be overowned now, so how could I get off of him and get leverage elsewhere? It's like, technically, I don't need to know anything about the sport in order to do that.
Technically, Wanamaker was always going to be overowned if he was owned.
Well, yeah, Wanamaker truck never works, right?
Never ever works. But yeah, you're right. It's and I think that I am one of the people that certainly I like as an originator. I think that I do build very good, unique modeling opportunities. But at the same time, I do value quite a bit Vegas info. Like my PGA model is entirely based on Vegas info because I don't know anything really about the sport. And I don't feel that I need to know anything about sport because like Vegas does a pretty good job of like putting out lines on top 5 finish, top 10 finish, whatever. And spotting the market inefficiencies in terms of DFS of saying, okay, well, Rory McIlroy is, he's top 5 in terms of top finish percentage. And the books like him, but he's only going to be 4% owned. Okay. Play Rory. It's not that hard in terms of like PGA and stuff like that. I actually do very much appreciate the idea of steam chasing in sports that I don't think you really need to have great grasp of how to play that sport. PGA is a good example. MMA is another example where, like, you were talking about unique lineups like that.
Right. Kai Kara France on he was the low. He came in as the lowest owned fighter at like 6%.
Which is weird.
I had him in like 20% of my lineups, and I'm like, why is the favorite in this fight at 8,500 lower owned than some of these humongous underdogs? And I knew right at in one of the Discord chats because he never gets a finish until he actually did get a finish. Until this Saturday, he scored 106 points. So it's like I didn't know that. All I knew is that it's an 85. It's a guy in the mid range that was going to come in low owned. I mean, I had him projected to like 12 to 14% owned. And I'm like, is he worth playing at 12 to 14%? Well, I could make unique lineups, part of it. Okay. But when I saw him come in at 6%, I was like, I was like, great, give it to me. Right. A favorite coming in that low end, the female fighter, Limosh. She came in at like 10% owned, and I had like double her. I mean, I had some really good lineups if it wasn't for like two other fighters that put up nothings.
Yeah.
I had too many in my lineups, but I didn't know anything about the fighters. All I knew is that is the field. This is the way I think. That maybe the wrong way in 2021. Outside of like someone like Amanda Nunes, DFS players don't tend to roster higher priced female favorites.
No.
But I mean, it's not a sexism thing. It's just that there are much fewer finishes in women's MMA fights, and there's higher variance. So to pay $8,700 for basically a fight that, according to the sports books, had a very high likelihood of going to decision. Like, yeah, I get it that the scoring potential is lower, but also the ownership is lower. So like, why not play her? There you go. And then she put up 120 points in a victory. So like, are these the things that I need to know? Like, how much do I need to know about MMA other than I'm focusing on what the field is going to do? Why is the field going to do what the field is going to do? Is it a logical reason? At some point, it is. Some parts of it, yes, it's a logical reason to do so. But is it the percentage? When people like in NFL, the wind's going to be 20 miles an hour, can't play the game. It's like, well, there's a point in ownership where you can play the game, right? There's a point where I can't stack against Jacob deGrom. Well, there's a point where you can. Like, there's a point where if Jacob deGrom is 95% owned on a 12-game slate, right? Like, I'm going to play some stacks against him. Like, you're just opening yourself up to relative value, because if he's going to be in 95% of the rosters, I'm going to hope for a bad game. But if Jacob deGrom is going to be 30% owned, then okay, then what's the value in stacking against him now? Not as much. So there's going to be a line somewhere. And I consider my strength is finding where that line is, where the line of efficiency is. And is the field going to be above or below that? And then if it's going to be too far above, then I'm like, get out of here. And if it's too far below, that's when I roster them. And this is where it comes down to, I don't predict outcomes. But you would have to admit, James, that with your models, you technically are trying to predict outcomes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, my models, I actually started out building models. I didn't have projections for my models 2 years ago. I had ratings. I had players that rated well. In baseball, I think that projections are pretty silly, actually. I think that players and stacks and, pitchers, like, you should look for the highest upside spots, but I didn't build projection models until recently. And that's only so that people can enter them into optimizers. That's pretty much the only reason why I have projections. I build models, and I build these to identify upside and identify spots where things could happen, where upside could live. Not necessarily where it does, because a median projection is that's exactly what it is. It's median, on either side of that, like the median outcome, I posted on Twitter, I don't know, like a couple weeks ago or something like that. It was Chris Chioza, where his median projection was like 14 fantasy points or something. like Tyler Johnson was out and there was no Kyrie Irving, and like Chris Chioza's median was 14, but his ceiling based on his range of outcomes, based on what his per minute stuff was, if he were to have like the perfect outcome, his ceiling was going to be like 25 minutes and like 38 fantasy points or something stupid. Like, if you are looking at things that way, median projections are a very, very small piece of the puzzle when you are building out and trying to identify upside. So as much as I am trying to predict outcomes, what I'm really just trying to do is I'm trying to find upside. And then I am looking at, okay, what is the rest of the field going to do? You know, if I think that the Marlins, if my models have the Marlins having a 6% chance, or let's say a 16% chance of being the top scoring overall lineup, you know, some arbitrary number, 16%, and they're only going to be 4% owned, I want the Marlins. I don't really care about the median projection of the Marlins. I don't even necessarily care about the ceiling projection of the Marlins outside of them having a 4 times better chance than the field thinks of being the overall score. Because when you're rostering players in DFS, what you're doing is, I mean, straight up, you're saying, if you're taking Giannis Antetokounmpo on a lineup, you're saying that he's going to be the highest scoring stud on that slate. You're not doing it because he has a cool name. You're not doing it because the projection is 2 points better than Luka. You're doing it because you think that he has the best chance of being the top overall scoring stud, and because he fits the lineup and, you know, things like that. But if he's going to be 45% owned and Luka's going to be 12% owned, I'm taking Luka. the projection there, like the 4 or 5 point median projection there, doesn't matter when I get a 40% difference in the ownership of that player. Giannis being significantly overowned in that situation, I care a lot more about what the field is going to do and what I think people are going to do in terms of the lineups that they build, the teams that they're going to back. I care a lot more about that and finding the inefficiencies on the lower owned pieces rather than I do actually predicting the outcomes of any individual piece.
Right, so, but you start with that. I start the opposite. I come from the opposite perspective.
That's because I'm an originator and you're a steam chaser.
Right, because I'm just looking at projections. Yeah. So I'm just like, give me the ownership, and then I can go, why is this guy going to be this? And then we both get to that point that we're making plus EV lineups. It's just that you start with, okay, let me project the players.
Yep.
And then let's see what the field's going to do. And I start with, let's see what the field's going to do. And then, why is the field going to play 38% Garrison Matthews today? Like, right. Versus some other $3,200 guy that, like, yes, the projections would say that Matthews is better projected, but like 30, that dramatically different? No. So like but I start from that side. So I think, essentially we're both doing the same thing, that this is what DFS is. It's not about predicting outcomes, but it's also not about just purely like, what's the field going to do? And I don't care anything about projections, but I just wanted to at least ponder in MLB that with the inherent high variance and the fact that most players get similar amount of opportunity, that if you were to go in with a purely game theory driven approach with no projections, that I think you could be the most competitive, maybe not the most profitable, but at least competitive. Like you not be throwing your money away by just like screwing the projections and saying, I'm just what Orioles plus Blue Jays plus 2 pitchers and however that fits together for 50,000 or whatever, 49.9. Like you'd be fine. And you'd actually be better off than the people that bang their head against the keyboards.
You'd definitely be better off than people who go BVP.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. BVP, all BVP team, right? Or just the one-offs and anything like that. It still comes down to, I think, most of the edge in DFS comes from playing the game of DFS well and not knowing the sport.
Yep.
And that's why you should pick up The Theory of DFS, The Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports, 15-hour audio masterclass, talks about all these concepts with me and James. We go through it. Game objectives, player selection, expected value, leverage, correlation, construction, risk management, exploits, psychology. It's 15 hours of content It's a reference guide. This is evergreen. This is not just about NBA or just about MMA or just about NFL or like all these concepts apply to all the sports or all anything. You could apply this to anything. Apply it to any game. I mean, it's a lot of stuff that I learned in poker. The same type of thing. Backgammon, gin rummy, any type of game you could play. These concepts apply. So, like, theory of daily fantasy sports, how to think like a professional DFS player. Go to theoryofdfs.com to pick that up. This is a longer show than I thought. I thought it's gonna be what is there to do today? There's nothing to do. So maybe it's be a half an hour show, and then we get into discussion. We got the people in the chat chiming in, right? Chiming in. Meet Mr. Meatplow. Alex Santi's here, putting it in. But we'll be. I'm more interested in. Yeah, I think we're both. James, I think we're both in the mentality of like, bring on baseball. I'm sick of basketball.
Just give me the baseball season, dude.
Right, just get me the MLB season. But this is the way it is for all DFS players. Because you know what's going to end up happening by the end of July?
Yeah, man. 3 months in, get me to NFL.
You got to get me to NFL. As long as we could just get to NFL season, it would be all good. And then NFL starts, and it's like, just get me to NBA season. It all gets better then, and it just the cycle goes around and around. So James, paydirt_DFS on Twitter.
Yep, paydirt_DFS on Twitter. You can find my work over at paydirt.ghost.io. I am actually going to be doing something special this week. I'm going to be opening up the community Discord to the public for a week. It's something that I think is a really big part of why a subscription over at my site is important. The discussion that happens there, the community there, everything like that. So make sure that you look for that on Twitter. I'm going to be posting a link so that people can get in and just come and see what all the fun is about. So make sure that you don't miss out on that.
So hit the thumbs up button on the way out. I'm done with my apple juice. That's how long we went. The apple juice is gone. I have to get another one now. So hit the thumbs up, thumbs on the way out the door. As I sneeze.
Bless you.
And say, we'll be back tomorrow. I don't know what the hell we'll be talking about. Come join the chat. Tomorrow, there's still no slate. There's no James. It'll just be me. And I'll be answering all the questions that you were afraid to ask today or ever or whatever, or the same questions you always ask. And I've probably given an answer before, but that's fine. I don't mind answering the same questions over and over again. But check that out tomorrow on another edition of the DFS pregame show here on RotoGrinders.com.